Hi all, dear listeners. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today, I have the huge pleasure of being joined by Wonki Min, Ambassador for Science, Technology and Innovation of the Republic of Korea. Welcome, Wonki, to my show.
Thank you, Oriol, for inviting me here.
Well, as I said before, it's going to be my pleasure to host you, and I think it's going to be especially interesting to hear from you because, well, you are my first guest from the Republic of Korea, so I'm sure it's going to be very enlightening for both myself and I hope to my listeners as well.
I also hope that our talk can give some ideas to our audience that how they can do business with Korea. At the same time, what kind of thing they can expect from Korea.
And I think, though, that before starting to talk about science and technology and innovation in Korea, maybe we should start like from the very beginning. And I would like to start by asking you if you could please share a bit more with my listeners about your personal journey, and also given that you worked for more than 25 years in the Korean government and international organizations, if you could please as well, let us know what kind of tasks you've been doing for the Korean government as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I started my career as deputy director at the Korean government in 1988, so long times ago. And when I started the job at the time, the Ministry of Communications, internet was not there. So one of my jobs, which I still remember very well, is commercializing the internet in Korea. That was 1993. So we actually take this internet as a granted, but internet has been around us since then, 1993, 1992. It depends on the country where you live. But when first it came to my attention, I actually experienced difficulties to explain what kind of technology it is to my bosses. So they try to actually regulate the internet just as telecommunication services. So I try to persuade them this is not a service we could regulate just like the telecommunication services that will actually stifle the competition in the marketplace. So we actually commercialized this, and then I went to actually OECD and working there for 3 years at the Secretariat. And I was responsible for the regulatory reform project at that time. At that time, the European Union countries and most of the OECD countries actually were in the process of liberalizing telecommunications market. So even in 1998, 1999, not many countries had competition in the telecommunication market. And so there were some concerns how to harmonize the regulation across the OECD countries. So we did actually regulatory reform review on countries. So I wrote a paper on the Netherlands, Italy, Greece, Korea, Japan, and all those countries, and had a chance to actually learn about the regulatory system in those countries. And then came back to Korea again and serving as the chief secretary to the minister, and then taking a director position at the Telecommunication Competition Bureau. So I was responsible for the privatization of Korea Telecom. Then that was the incumbent operator. And then I went to actually World Bank and working there for 3 years. And I was responsible for the broadband project. So I went to Trinidad and Tobago and Morocco, those countries, and providing a consultation to the government officials in those countries. And then coming back to Korea, and then I was responsible for the radio management. So I was the head of the Central Radio Management Office. And I was also responsible for the kind of the how to promote the IT sector in Korea. And then I became the spokesperson for the ministry, and then deputy minister, and vice minister. And internationally, I served as the ITU plenipotentiary chair, 2014, and I was also the chair of the 2015 ITU Council. And I chaired the OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy for 3 years. And I was honored to chair OECD AI Experts Group, which produced OECD AI recommendations. And currently, and then I became the president of State University of New York, Korea, and serving 2 years as the president of the university. And then I'm currently serving as ambassador for science, technology, and innovation for my country.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your personal journey with me and all my listeners. And well, I think that what you mentioned before about the internet in the early 90s is a clear example of how technologies evolved so fast. No? I mean, less than 30 years ago, many people didn't even know what the internet actually was. No, I mean, so I think it's quite interesting to see how fast everything is evolving right now and how important innovation and technology has become for most advanced countries. So following this, I would like now to dig a bit deeper on this idea of science and technology and innovation in the Republic of Korea. And I think it would be fair to start by asking you, well, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the current situation of all these areas, technology, science, and innovation in Korea?
Actually, last year, Bloomberg ranked Korea as #1 country in their national and global innovation index. So Korea is ranked as #1 as the most innovative country in the world. So, which is a clear actual sign of how Korea is doing in the field of science, technology, and innovation. When you look at the numbers, Korea actually put 5% of GDP in R&D activities. That is the second highest in the world, just next to Israel. So Israel is #1, but the difference is the margin is very small. So we put almost 5% of the total GDP in R&D, which clearly shows how much emphasis we put on technology, science, and innovation. Korea does not have any natural resources. We are not a country which have many resources or huge population. We just have over 50 million population. So the way we can survive and the way we can actually thrive in the global competition is actually we can maintain technological edge over other countries. But we know that competition is very hard. Previously, there were not many countries which took this kind of approach. So, and Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. You can name just a few countries which actually took steps to use this science and technology to make national development. However, nowadays, most countries actually take the same kind of strategy to make their national developments. And you can see the kind of recent advancement of China and India and all those countries. So competition is getting harder. And we realize very well that we need to move fast and we need to move to the right direction because the technology is evolving so fast, as you mentioned. So it's not easy to find out the right way to move on. Because sometimes if you pick the kind of wrong technology, even though that technology looks quite promising, but in terms of the capitalization of the technology, it takes long years if you put too much national resources, financial resources on that technology, then you will be in trouble. So it is very important to do the right technology assessment in the decision-making process and sharing those informations with industry, academia, and research institutions. So the whole ecosystem can make the right choice and can put the efforts together to maintain and to build global competitiveness.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think Korea decided to take this approach on this? Because you mentioned that Korea devotes approximately 5% of its GDP in science and technology and innovation. And I mean, we're talking about a very huge figure. I don't have the exact figures, for example, for other countries, but I seem to remember that the country where I was born, Spain, well, it has a population not so different from that of Korea. 48 million people living in Spain. But when it comes to the amount of our GDP devoted to science and technology, I think we're talking about a 1.5%, so it's much less than Korea. So why did Korea decide to bet so well, so strongly, no, on these relevant areas?
Going back to maybe even in 1970s or even late 1960s, when we were one of the poorest countries in the world, our leader at the time, the President Park Chung-hee, actually realized that the only way we could actually make national development is because we, as I already mentioned, we do not have natural resources. Mm-hmm. At the time, we did not have financial resources and even human resources because we do not have a human capacity actually to deliver something good, something very high quality. So what we did was actually we tried to benchmark other countries who made success in the national economic growth, such as Germany and Korea, so Japan. They were actually the kind of the losing countries in World War II. So they were defeated and their economy was not that good. But they made a kind of economic growth based on the industrial policy, very well coordinated and sophisticated industrial policy. So we actually benchmarked that kind of approach. That was the reason when we got the kind of financial aid from World Bank and from foreign countries, we put those money in the strategic industries, such as chemical industry and steel industry, automobile industry, shipbuilding industry. And we also tried to build some kind of ecosystem there. So we gave some kind of preference to the engineering school students. So here in Korea, we have to go to military, full man. So we have to serve the military 2 years. Previously, it was 3 years. Now it's less than 2 years, but it's a huge actually burden for young people. But if you go to engineering school and stay at the industry for 5 years, you are exempted from that kind of military duty. So that system has been there for a long time, And at the same time, because our private sector was so fragile in 1960s, 70s, 80s, even in 80s. So what we did was actually build some public research institutions. These institutions supported the whole industry, not just small and medium-sized enterprises, even big companies like Samsung and LG. So when Samsung and LG first introduced their mobile phones and their mobile switching system, that technology actually was supported by E31. That is still the government-sponsored research institution. So we tried to build this kind of ecosystem, which is support the whole industry based on the R&D. Because we do not have kind of national natural resources like any other countries. So the only way Korea can compete and Korea can actually stay in competition in the global economy is actually we should excel in technology and science.
Mm-hmm. I see. No, I mean, if I say something wrong, please correct me. No, but I'm a huge fan of Korea's history, and I've tried to study your history like well, in many different ways. And I'm also a huge fan of your cinema and literature now, and I think I must have like watched over like 50 or 60 Korean movies in just 1 year. No, so by watching your movies and reading your books and trying to study your history, well, I realized that, and as I said before, correct me if I'm wrong, no, I mean, Korea's case is remarkable because from a not so wealthy country in the late 70s or early 80s to where you are today, it shows that things have been properly done, no, and I think, I mean, that this R&D approach may have a huge like important now in this growth as well, because instead of focusing on other areas, you decided to excel in where you can actually be stronger, no? Because as you said, Korea has not enough natural resources. So instead of that, you focus on I think, areas more related to innovation. And I think that, well, to me, that's remarkable, no? What this kind of evolution that we've seen in Korea, from the 80s until today.
Yeah, I think this is not unique, but Korea is unique in a sense to make a success by taking this kind of model. So Korea is still the only country which actually received the kind of the financial support from international organizations such as the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. Now we become the donor country. So this is the only case in the world that this country which received this kind of financial aid from the international organizations just turn itself into a donor country. So even we know that what kind of the policy options are available in the marketplace, but effectively implementing that and achieving some kind of outcome is a totally different story. In order to do that, you must actually have a very strong leadership. At the same time, all of your people and private sector and academia needs to actually work together to actually achieve the goal, the national goal set by the country. Nowadays, the Korean economy and society is more diversified, so it is very difficult to actually share that kind of single national goal with all people or corporations. But in 1960s, 70s, until 80s, I think this kind of national goal was shared with the general public and most of the companies. So country actually still working very vibrantly in the marketplace.
I see. And well, we all know that Seoul, being your capital and biggest city, plays a very important role, no, in Korea's innovation science in this area. But still, I know that there are more relevant areas. So I wanted to ask you, like, what's Seoul's role? What's Seoul doing better than other financial centers? And also whether there is like any other area that in Korea that you think is also like very interesting from this startup / innovation perspective.
Yeah, Seoul is a big city. Seoul is a big city. It has more than 10 million population and it becomes global city. So nowadays, when you just walk down the street, you can see many foreigners in downtown Seoul or in Gangnam area. And many foreign actually engineers and even startup companies are starting doing their business in Seoul. So Seoul is doing very well in that sense. And the Seoul metropolitan government provides these spaces for startup companies. They have their own financing program, and they actually provide this public Wi-Fi. So wherever you go, you can be connected to this broadband internet services in Seoul. So Seoul metropolitan area is very good to do business for foreigners. However, we also have some cities, very strategic cities, we try to actually attract more foreign companies, which is actually Pangyo and Songdo. Pangyo is located just south of part of Seoul. So it's just the adjacent city, neighboring city of Seoul. And Pangyo is a part of Seongnam City, but we actually built this city, tried to build the Korean Silicon Valley. So when you go to Pangyo, there are big actually corporations such as Naver, Kakao, and big game companies such as NeoWiz and Nexen. And even you can find many foreign companies there. So it's a kind of cluster. So especially for digital IT companies are located in that area. And Songdo is a kind of city built as designed as smart city started from 1990. So about 30 years ago, we built this city. And this city is very famous for this bio-related startup companies. And there is a big two corporations, Samsung Bioseeds and another big company there. So they built this ecosystem. So small and medium-sized and startup bio companies that they're working together with this Samsung and another company there. So there are some areas, not just Seoul, but there are some cities and areas which become more of a kind of global hub for startup companies.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned this Songdo International Business District. And well, I've also been very interested in smart cities. Actually, my area of research a few years ago was that one. So I wanted to ask you well, a bit more about it. Like, as far as I know, Songdo is conceptualized as the ultimate smart and sustainable city. So what does it look like, and why was it created the way it was?
Actually, Songdo has an advantage because it was built from the greenfield. Actually, that it was built on the reclaimed land. If you have a kind of old city, to retrofit that as a smart city is a much tougher challenge to build a smart city on greenfield. So that was one of the advantage it enjoyed from the start, from the beginning, because when we first thought about this city, we tried to, even in 1980, we thought about building this Songdo, and we designed this city as a ubiquitous city. So wherever you go, you could be connected to this ubiquitous mobile network, and sensor network will collect data and provide the information to the city government and companies located there. So if you could do that from the beginning without any kind of obstacles, you could build this kind of city. The problem Songdo faces right now is actually because it was designed in about 30 more years ago. So now new technologies come up. So they need to actually upgrade their technology. Songdo originally actually had 700 sensors, if my recollection is correct, to collect data, so provide some traffic information, and so use the kind of how the city lamps are actually working, or those kind of things. But there are new applications coming up based on this mobile platform and many things. So they actually, I'm still serving as the kind of co-chair of Incheon job committee, Incheon Metropolitan City Job Committee with the mayor. And whenever I have a chance to talk with him, we discuss the kind of the need to improve the kind of applications currently used in the Songdo metropolitan city. So I see this smart city thing as another kind of one-time construction project. I see this smart city thing as a kind of building smart city ecosystem, so it can evolve over the time as technology evolves.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, thank you very much for sharing. And before you mentioned as well this idea of Korea's Silicon Valley, so I wanted to ask you about Korea's startup scene. What does it look like? And also, as far as I know, even though South Korea's startup scene is very strong, it hasn't reached yet the level, for example, of Israel or Singapore. And I know that some people say, I may be wrong, but that's what they say, that maybe it's because Korea hasn't managed yet to attract enough international talent. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on this part as well.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a kind of the question we try to solve and try to address in a light way. So when you look at the current startup atmosphere here in Korea, the most encouraging thing is previously when these college students, when they are doing well at college, their actually goal was going to Samsung or big banks or something like that, big established company. They would like to actually build their career in this big conglomerates. However, nowadays it's changing very fast. So when we do survey on what kind of companies do you want to go to college students, they want to go to this tech startup company. And some of them really want to build their own company. So this is a kind of big shift from the kind of previous kind of legacy environment where people actually preferred kind of stability over kind of the taking some risks. Nowadays, this younger generation, they would like to actually test the market and go to the market and build their own company. So that is the most promising thing. And when you look at the number here, so year 2017, the amount of venture capital money put into these startups was around 3 trillion won. 3 trillion. That is approximately 2.5 billion US dollar. But last year, that number was tripled at the end. So it went over 7 trillion won, which is almost 6.5 or 6.8 actually billion US dollars. So now venture capitals can have companies to invest their money there, startup companies. So number of tech startup companies are increasing rapidly. So these are all good indicators. We can see that the Korean startup actually atmosphere and environment is getting better and better. But as you rightly mentioned, when you compare that kind of our startup ecosystem with that of Singapore, Israel, or Boston and Dallas, and even Berlin, you name it, there are more vibrant, actually global tech startup cities. Maybe there are some reasons because we use Korean language and still not many Korean people can speak English comfortably. They understand well, but it's not easy for them to communicate with foreigners, which makes foreign actually startup companies difficult to come to Korea because it's not just the business environment. They actually need to bring their family here. So their family need to live together with the community. The language is very important. So that's the reason we try to build Songdo and Pangyo as a global startup hub. So when you go to Songdo, you can see many foreigners there. And I was the kind of the president of State University of New York, Korea, that is located in Songdo. We have 50% of our faculty was at the time foreigners, and 20% of students are foreign students. And I encourage foreign students to stay here in Korea and to do your business. So they actually feel not much difficulty in doing their business in the area like Songdo or Pangyo. However, still, compared with Singapore, where when you go there, you just speak English. Yeah, you can just take taxi and speak English where you want to go. Israel, you experienced it, very similar thing. But here in Korea, you actually need some kind of this mobile app to find out where to go and what kind of subway train you need to take. So it's not just a kind of a business support and the kind of financial support, technical support we are providing. We actually provide, I think, even better services than those countries in terms of the public support. But because of the kind of the cultural thing, we may need some time to catch up these countries. But I think the pace of catching up is actually, now we are almost there. We are almost there, especially in some specific places like Songdo and Pangyo. And I hope that we can attract more foreign talents here in Korea so they can enjoy this good infrastructure to make their business actually thriving.
No, I mean, I'm sure you will. You will attract foreign talent because Korea is a very interesting country. And even though, as you said before, there is or there may be a language barrier, I would say as well that based on my experience there as a tourist, which I know it's different, no, but still, I just speak like 4 or 5 words in Korean, no, but still, I mean, it was never like very difficult for me to be able to get understood by local Koreans, because I think that Korean people are very open-minded and international. So even though there may be these language barriers sometimes, and I know that in business it's important to remove as many barriers as possible, I think that the right mindset and environment is there, no? So I think it's actually a place very interesting, no, for foreigners as well to try to move to and do business with.
Yeah, it's very encouraging to hear that.
I mean, that's my personal experience. No, I know that maybe somebody else's experience may be different. I don't know, but my experience was great in that sense. So I think it's actually a very international place.
Korea becomes more global every day.
No, I can tell, and I also think that foreign people are also starting to become much more interested towards Korea as well. No, it's not just Korea being more open, no, because I know it may sound silly, but you know, for example, this very successful series, The Squid Game, which was on Netflix. I mean, it was watched like by millions and millions of people worldwide. Even people I know in Europe who have like no interest whatsoever in Asia or Asian series or Asian movies watch that series and try to learn a bit more about Seoul, about Korea. So I think this kind of things, this kind of very strong soft power that Korea has right now when it comes to K-pop movies may actually be very successful when it comes to Korea's startup scene and innovation scene, no? Because it's kind of opening Korea to the world in a different way. I mean, at least this is my opinion on this.
I think that's our analysis too. When you look at the popularity of Squid Game and Korean dramas and popularity of BTS and Blackpink, so especially younger generation, the global younger generation, they know Korea very well, and they are interested in coming over here. Some of my students at the State University of New York, they mentioned that they were big fan of this K-pop and Korean drama. That was one of the kind of motivations for them actually to come to Korea for studying. So it makes them feel more comfortable because they already know what kind of society and community it is through drama, Korean drama and Korean pop songs, all those kind of things. That certainly helps. But at the same time, we have to do our homework. We need more international schools here. We also need a kind of a residential community where we can accommodate this foreign actually startup related families, not just a startup, but more foreign actual talents here in Korea.
Indeed, I mean, I think that soft power plays a very important role, but much more than that is required. But still, I think that overall, my listeners will agree that that Korea has been done a remarkable job these last few years. And unfortunately, we are running out of time now. There are like many more topics that I would have liked to discuss with you, because I know that you played a big role as well in Korea's 5G structure. So there are many things that I would have liked to discuss. As I said, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I would like to host you again in the future if you want, because it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oro. So let me say one thing, because during our talk, I didn't remember the name of the company, bio company in Songdo. That company is E31. E31 is a kind of company I would like to actually introduce to our audience. At the same time, as you rightly mentioned, I also would like to be invited here once again, so I can introduce our 5G strategy, 5G plus strategy, and the national AI strategy. So this is not just a strategy for Korea. We actually try to cooperate and collaborate with our foreign partners. In the world of artificial intelligence, no single company or no single country can do everything.